back for another ECD conversation between you and I, where we kick about a few topics and relate them into emotions in the workplace and the emotional culture deck. So we thought we'd do a series of questions around change. We thought this is something that we get asked about a lot in masterclass meetups, etc. And so we thought we'd delve into the world of change, something close to my heart. So the first question that we were really going to have a look at, I'm looking at my notes here because I've got lots of notes on this one, is why is it hard to make change stick in an organization? Why is it hard to make change stick? And if you're thinking, why is that a question? Because I think change is easy in my organization. Please do dial in, email us and let us know your secret. But why is change hard? Why is it hard, particularly to make it stick, to get those benefits embedded and to get it to stick? Any thoughts from you, Steve?
Yeah, I think if you do know the answer, you should be doing the interview on the next podcast. Well, I think the first thing I was saying, I'm going to look at some notes as well, because it's such a broad area, isn't it? And I was giving this a lot of thought. And the first thing I thought is, well, is the change sticky? You know, how do we make change? Is the change sticky? And by that, I mean, are people catching the change? Is it attracting people to it? You know, are they in some way, sticking to it? And to add some flavor to that, some of the things I was thinking about to bring that to life are the behaviors, the desired behaviors that can support the change, have they been identified? Do people know what the expectations are and what those expected behaviors are to bring that change to life? Are people able to see the behaviors being role modeled? Be able to see the change in real life being role modeled by leaders and peers? Because if people are going to take the change seriously, can they see it? Can they catch it? Can they get an opportunity to stick to it? I'm liking the word sticky. I'm on that.
Sticky.
And that point about, those who are required to change or need to change or might even want to change, but for those that, are coming into this, are they willing to change? Do they know why the change is necessary and the purpose behind it? Do they have an opportunity to try and align beside it or behind it? And do they know how to change in that respect? And then the last two things I'd noted around this were, are people practicing the new change behaviors together, the new ways of working, the new operating rhythm that's been required or been put in place? Are people having an opportunity to practice it and hold each other accountable to it? So it's not just an individual thing. There's a sense of collegiality about this change. And also the changes that are being taken place, if they're not sticking straight away, is there an overwhelming urge to tweak it and change it again? But actually, rather than just giving it some room to breathe and some air. So I think, is the change sticky? There's my 5 bullet points.
So I kind of step even back from the willingness. Is actually, if you look at, you talk about, is it sticky? Is the story of change provocative? Like, is like the benefit of changing provocative enough in the way you're telling the story? It might be really obvious to the executives or people that have decided that this is a priority to make this change. Or is the story of the risk of not changing provocative enough? Because sometimes it's not about the carrot that you're going towards. Sometimes it's also understanding the stick, the proverbial stick, to a certain degree. So how are you articulating that story in a context and way that is really resonant with the people that are impacted by it? Which might mean there's an overall story, but it might mean you actually have to do like different flavors of that story. I always like to think of it like, tell the story like a 12-year-old would understand it. Not because people are idiots, but because actually people have got so overloaded with information, they just need a very basic like why story that they can understand instantly. So don't fluff it up too much. We love acronyms. We love to fluff language up. No, keep it super simple. Another thing that I had was actually one of the biggest reasons I've seen in my career of why change is hard. Obviously, you've got the mindset. So there's a lot of scar tissue from previous times in the organization or previous times in your career where you've been subjected to change that you brought forward into this change. So understand the scar tissue of the organization. What beliefs do people have? What expectations people have? What are the water cooler conversations that never really came to the surface? We're going to explore this in a future question, so I'm not going to go in too deep. So that you can really understand up front, what might that resistance be? Not honoring the emotions of change is a big thing, which is why we're going to talk also about in a future question about how we can use the emotional culture deck for change. But I see a real lack of patience. So there's a lot of patience in an organization, a lot of impatience in an organization. And that is obviously because the pace of change is so fast. But we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot because we're like, right, we know we've got to change, we've got to do it, it's just got to be done. And then we're not giving people the time to really adopt it. So we give them the knowledge, but then we don't give them the time to really see, can we put that knowledge into practice? Is it working? Is there anything that's not working? So we're not adjusting as we go. And then just doing too much in terms of like, what's a priority? You can't have like 10 number one priorities. You can only have one number one priority. But what I see constantly in organizations is we're running around like the headless chickens, not knowing really what is the one that we pay the most attention to. And we are a finite resource, us humans. We only have so much time, so much energy. We don't have a downloadable chip that we can just upload into our brain that says, this is all the data you need for the next release or quarter in this organization that's going to give you everything you need to know in the changing times. We just can't take all of that in. We can't multitask as much as we think we can. Yet organizations at an organizational level are trying to multitask with multiple changes at the same time. I use the example of an airport. This is used quite widely in the change world of if you have like air traffic control is basically looking at how much change you're landing, how many planes you're landing. They're the different change initiatives. You can't land 10 planes at once. You can't land 10 planes at once in terms of change on people's brains. So you have to integrate that and really understand what ones are going to land when for the right results and benefits. I could go on with this question, but I'm going to pause to give you some reflections on what I said and if anything else has come up.
Yeah, I think the point of attention is really, really important. You know, all of us spending some time reflecting on what we're paying attention to. What are we paying attention to? Because that's the monster we tend to feed the most, isn't it? And you know, is that a helpful monster? Is that an unhelpful monster? And I think there's something about, is our behavior helping or harming us? And I think within change, that's really important. Take the point
what
about
are the practices? What you're saying, what are the practices already in place? You talked about like what's going on in the organization in terms of beliefs, but what are the workplace practices that just happen? The norms, the rules, the behaviors that are happening, are they beneficial to the change, or do you need to completely give them an extreme makeover? Because those processes sometimes go against what you're trying to achieve, all those behaviors.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think it's important when we think about our own behaviors and our own emotions, that question is what I'm thinking, doing, behaving, helping or harming. And I think at a team level, at a department level, at an organization level, we can ask that, you know, and change can be disruptive, even if we're pro change or whatever our feelings about it, it is disruptive. And that might mean, you know, old habits, old rituals, old behaviors are not required, or in some way being seen as no longer fit for the change or fit for the future. So, you know, we have an emotional dimension to this. Of course we don't, you know, the emotional impact of that. Even if we're for the change, you know, we have to give some of that room to breathe. We have to give that an opportunity for people to engage with the emotional impact of that. Let alone before they start thinking about the new change and what's required of them. So I think, you know, change is disruptive, and sometimes that disruption might be required, but we can't be reckless in our approach, even if the change is bold. I think there's a difference between being bold and being reckless, and I think leaders are required to be bold at times, but it's reflecting on whether it's being reckless. So I think bold and reckless for me is something to pay attention to as well.
Yeah. And you know, a big word that I kind of put down when I was thinking about this, reflecting about this, was, you know, integrity and that versus disjoint. I mean, you called it lack of integrity, but, you know, integrity we see as being something that if you lack integrity, you're like a bad person. Integrity really means is that what you're doing does not integrate with your values or what you believe or your intentions. And so You talked about like leaders, and I think there's often there's a lack of integrity at many levels. There's a lack of integrity in terms of what we're doing in terms of our processes and things like that. I also like to think of change debt, so which kind of supports this. So, you know, when you look at the technology world, we'll quite often hear about technology debt. These are systems and things within. I'm not a techie person, so just so you know, I'm probably not explaining this as well as I could, but all those systems and technology kind of networks and infrastructure within our business that don't support us being able to transform as an organization. So we have this with change. It just might not be something that you can actually put your fingers on and is actually a tangible, hard thing you can see. It could be a way of being. It could be a process. So actually look at your change debt that you have, which is all of those things that might hold you back. They can be behaviors. They can be practices. They can actually sometimes, you know, could be people. Sometimes we look at like the capability we need to make this change is not the capability we have at the moment. So you have a choice then. Do you actually sort of farm, do you cultivate that within the business, which when you haven't got much patience is going to take time. So that could, or do you bring in new capability? So, you know, you've got some choices. And I think actually lack of decision making through change can stop it sticking as well. And also this tendency to want to move on to shiny new things, which again comes back to the patience versus impatience. We love shiny new things. So it's like, oh, we've delivered that now. We've gone live. Let's move on to the next thing. Change takes time to embed. And so you need to be actually starting to go back and look and say what's working, what isn't, what are the learnings, really being open to the fact you're going to, when you look under those covers, there could be some stuff that you don't like, but that's the only way you can really get those kind of benefits embedded, make the changes to get those benefits embedded. And I feel that there isn't the appetite to do that. They just want to move on to the next thing. They say it's done. And then when they start to look at their bottom line in terms of the benefits being realized, they're not being realized because they've moved on too quickly. So I think we've got a few things there. I'm trying to think, is there anything else I had on my list? We could talk about this for literally hours.
Well,